I've talked about how using corpora can allow us to rapidly and reliably search, get out information that is very difficult to recover from our subconscious. Let's have a simple look here at frequency information, and I think that's a perfect example of the type of information that we can extract from a corpus, my mantra, rapidly and reliably, which it's almost impossible to recover from the subconscious, so by introspection. So here is an example of the word wash. I've looked at that in the British National Corpus, and very swiftly, and you'll be able to do this type of study yourself later on in the course, I got an answer which showed me that there were 2,415 matches in 952 different texts. And that was searching in the 98 million words or so of the BNC. It will also tell me that the frequency is 24.74 instances per million words. So it's telling me very directly about the frequency of that word, also about how frequently it's drawn on in a range of texts, and then normalizing that frequency, telling me how many times on average per million words does it occur. That type of information, as we'll see later in the course, can be very helpful indeed. It underlies a lot of language technology that we use nowadays. A lot of computer systems which can understand language or appear to some extent are actually relying to some extent, usually, on frequency information. Also, as we'll see in one of the later lectures, a lot of materials produced for learners of a language are now taking this type of information into account when deciding what and when to prioritize teaching to a particular learner of a language. So frequency information like that, very rapidly recovered from corpus data, very helpful. But we can also get other things out. We can just get lots of examples out of the data swiftly if we want. And one of the key tools, if you like, of the corpus linguist and the trade in corpus linguistics, if you want to call it that, is the concordance. We look for a word and we are shown that word in its context, a key word in context. Key here meaning the word we are looking for. So you can see in the concordance the word wash, and to the left and to the right you can see the context that it occurs in. So you get this rather stylized presentation, one example per line, the word you're interested in, the key word in this case, down the middle, wash, and then some context to the left or the right. That's very helpful when you're reading through and you want to rapidly get some sense of how the word relates to its context. And usually, of course, you can just scroll off down the bottom of the screen and look at hundreds of examples if you want. There, I've given you just a few. Also, as you'll discover, you're able to sort those lines depending on left context or depending on right context. So if you see a pattern emerging on the left, you can search and sort on left context. If you see a pattern or think you see a pattern emerging to the right, you can sort on right context, and that can help bunch together similar examples for you. So the concordance, an absolutely basic but also absolutely vital tool for the corpus linguist. Because, again, as you'll find on this course, our belief is that we should re-engage with the data frequently. Not simply use abstractions of the data that might be presented to us, like some of the frequency information that we saw on the previous slide, but re-engage with the data and use the data. This cyclical movement between abstractions of the data, analyses that the concordance packages might have undertaken, that's what these tools are typically called, and then our close reading of relevant parts of that text to understand what we're seeing. But that will be a continuous theme of the course. Okay, and here's an example where I'm sorting to the left. So I take the left context and I sort at 1L, 1 to the left of the keyword, and it resorts that context alphabetically on that basis. We can do more than that, however. And one thing which we'll be looking at later in the course, but I'll give you a taster of it now, is the notion of collocation. Collocation is something which we can see using the corpus, which is very difficult for us to appreciate without the use of it, though we use it on a daily basis. I'd want to emphasize that. And indeed, almost every sentence, I would argue, to some extent, relies upon the observed reality of collocation. So what is collocation? I'll describe it very briefly now, because there's a whole lecture coming up on it in a couple of weeks. But collocation is this tendency, or if you like, requirement for words to co-occur with one another and for meaning to be built out of that co-occurrence. Some people would also say grammar to be built out of that co-occurrence. But for the moment, I'll focus upon meaning. Words do not randomly appear together. Some of those co-occurrences are extremely consistent and bear meaning with them. Collocation is important for us to look at when we study language, and it's really the mass observation of co-occurrence in corpus data that allows us to begin to measure the extent to which words are coming together in order to form meaning. I think there's an English expression, you know somebody by the company they keep. There's an interesting similar Chinese expression as well, I think, which says the man who stands by ink is dyed black, the man who stands by vermilion is dyed red. It's the same with words. They shade one another's meanings and, if you like, almost co-construct meaning between them. Here we have the example of wash, its collocates. As I say, you'll find out much more about this later on, but this is derived from the BNC. This value that you see towards the end of the slide is some measure of how powerfully the word wash is associated with this word. In the instance we can see here, pedestal, and then basin, shave, basins, detergent, etc. And you see that that value, the mutual information value, declines as you go down the table. So if you like, the most powerfully associated word with wash is pedestal. So this is telling you something about the word wash. Very often you're talking about wash pedestal or wash basin or wash, oh, this one's slightly different, shave. Now in the other case, of course, we were building up a noun of sorts, a wash pedestal or wash basin. But here we have wash and shave, the verb to wash and also the verb to shave here coming together. They are things which tend to co-occur. They are co-occurring in the real world and they are co-occurring in language. So we find that collocation gives us this interesting route through, not merely to looking at meaning and word meaning and how it might be formed in context, but also sometimes observation of the world itself. Wash and shave tend to go together. So we can get this type of information. I won't go into too much more detail on it at the moment because, of course, this is going to be one of the key things that we look at in a couple of weeks' time. Something else that was implied earlier when we were looking at the frequency information was some type of measure of distribution of usage of a term. We also get that, of course, from a corpus, and in this respect, we can start to look for different types of distributions. Previously, when I showed you the information on frequency, I talked about the number of texts in which it was distributed. How many texts in the corpus included that word? Of course, in WASH, and with the spoken section of the BNC, we can look at different types of distribution, and this one we might say is sociolinguistically meaningful, the distribution between males and females, how often females mention the word wash, and how often males mention the word wash. We can see here that we have the number of words spoken by the male and the female respondents in the spoken BNC. That's important, because say, for example, you found that the word wash was mentioned once by men and 10 times by women, but you then found there was 10 times as much speech by women in the data as by men. There'd be no real effect there. It's proportionate to the amount of data produced by those two groups. Then we can look at number of hits and use frequency per million again, this normalizing score, which allows us to see, if you like, on a better basis of comparison, whether the word is used more or less frequently by males or females. This is a bit of fun, and I haven't subjected it to statistical measure, but you can see here that in terms of frequency per million, women talk a lot more about washing than men, and probably for most of the women watching this, you won't be at all surprised by that. So that's the type of information sometimes we can also get out. So it can be sociolinguistically meaningful to look for patterns like this in language.